She didn't scream. She didn't wave her arms or call out for help. When Jack Callahan's horse locked up hard on that baking Texas trail, and he swung down from the saddle to find a 9-year-old girl crumpled in the dust, lips split and bleeding eyes half shut against the white summer glare, fingers still wrapped around an empty canteen, like letting go meant giving up, the only sound she made was a whisper so thin it nearly stopped his heart. "Please." Her eyes found his through the heat. "Please don't send me back." Jack Callahan had built an empire on hard ground and harder decisions. Nothing in 38 years of living had ever hit him like those 5 words. Before we go any further, if this story already has, your heart, do us a favor right now and hit that subscribe button. Ring the bell so you don't miss a single part of Lily's story. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that dusty trail, because what happened next changed everything. The horse's name was Ranger, and in 12 years of riding together, Jack Callahan had never once known that animal to stop without a reason. Ranger wasn't skittish. He didn't spook at shadows or balk at heat. He was the kind of horse that would carry a man through a West Texas thunderstorm without so much as a sideways step. So when he halted dead in the middle of a trail, Jack had ridden 1,000 times, planting all 4 hooves and refusing to move forward no matter how Jack nudged him. Jack paid attention. He stood in the stirrups first, scanned the trail ahead. The land was flat and open here, baked pale by a July that had shown no mercy. The sky was the color of bleached bone. Heat shimmered up off the ground in slow, lazy waves. He saw the shape in the dust about 40 yards ahead. It took him a second to understand what he was looking at. The shape was small, too still. He swung down before Ranger had fully settled, boots hitting the ground hard, and he was moving fast by the time his brain caught up with what his eyes were telling him. A child, a little girl lying on her side in the middle of the trail. Her dress was gray, or had been once. Now it was gray-brown, with dust torn at the shoulder, dark with sweat down the back. Her hair was the color of raw honey, tangled and matted against her cheek. One shoe was missing. The bare foot underneath was scraped and blistered. He dropped to one knee beside her. "Hey." His voice came out rougher than he intended. He pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. Her pulse was there, fast and shallow, like a trapped bird, but there. "Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyelids moved, just barely. "I hear you," she whispered. The relief that went through him was almost violent. He reached for the canteen on his belt, uncapped it in one motion. "I'm gonna lift your head. Don't be scared. I ain't gonna hurt you." She didn't fight him when he slid his hand beneath her head and tilted it up. He brought the canteen to her lips, slow and careful, let the water come in small amounts. She swallowed, then swallowed again. Then her hand came up, trembling, barely steady, and wrapped around his wrist. She wasn't pushing the water away, she was holding on. He let her drink until he was worried she'd taken too much too fast. Then he pulled the canteen back gently. "Easy now, slow down." She was breathing harder, not from exertion, from the effort of coming back to herself. Her eyes opened all the way for the first time, and Jack looked into them and felt something shift in his chest that he couldn't name and didn't try to. They were green, dark, serious green, the eyes of a child who had learned long ago not to expect anything good from a stranger's face. She looked at him the way a wounded animal looks at an outstretched hand. Calculating, desperate, terrified of being wrong. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was barely there, scraped raw. "Jack Callahan. I own this land." He kept his voice low and even, the same way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "What's your name?" A pause. She seemed to weigh whether telling him was safe. "Lily." "Lily?" He nodded like that was the most natural thing in the world. "How long you been out here, Lily?" Her brow pulled together. She wasn't sure. That told him enough. "Okay." He stood and looked back at Ranger, then down at her. "I'm gonna pick you up and put you on my horse. That all right?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes dropped to his hands, big, calloused, sun-darkened, and then came back to his face. "You're not going to take me back?" she asked. He hadn't known then what she meant by that. He didn't know yet what she was running from, or who had left her here, or how a 9-year-old girl had ended up alone on a ranch road in the middle of a Texas July with no water, no shoes, and no one looking for her. He didn't know any of it. But something in the way she said it, the raw, quiet terror packed into those 6 words, made him answer without hesitation. "Take you back where—" Her lip trembled. Just once. She pressed it flat. "She left me here," she said. "She drove away." Jack Callahan stood very still in the hammering heat. "Who did—" "My stepmother." Lily's voice didn't shake when she said it. It went flat instead, the way a voice goes flat when a person has decided that crying doesn't help. "She said she was stopping to let me get some air. Then she got back in the car and drove away." The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Jack Callahan bent down, slid one arm under Lily Harper's knees and one behind her back, and lifted her off the ground. She weighed almost nothing. That fact alone made his jaw tighten. "You ain't going back," he said. "Not today." She grabbed hold of his shirt with both hands. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say anything. Just held on. And that was enough. Tetch. His ranch was called Callahan Flats, and it had been in his family for 3 generations. 14,000 acres of West Texas grassland, a main house built from limestone and cedar, and enough cattle to make his grandfather's ghost proud. Jack had never married, had never particularly wanted to. The house had more rooms than he used, and more quiet than he needed. And Rosa Mendez, who had cooked and kept that house for 20 years, had told him more than once that a place that size needed children in it before it turned into a monument. He'd always told her she was wrong. He pulled up to the main house with Lily in front of him in the saddle, her small back against his chest, her head drooped forward with exhaustion. Rosa was on the porch before he'd even gotten Ranger to a halt. She took one look at the child in Jack's arms as he swung down, and her hands went straight to her face. "Madre de Dios, Jack." "Jack. She needs water, food, and shade, in that order." He was already moving toward the porch steps. "Get the guest room off the kitchen, the cool one." Already thinking it. Rosa was ahead of him by the time he hit the top step, moving with the brisk, no-nonsense efficiency that had made her indispensable for 2 decades. "What happened?" "Found her on the South Trail. She's dehydrated, maybe more. I don't know how long she was out there." Rosa held the door open. "Has she said anything?" "Enough." He carried Lily through the door and into the dim, cool interior of the house. He felt the girl's grip on his shirt tighten when the cool air hit her. A small, involuntary sound escaped her, not quite a sigh, not quite a sob. Something in between. "You're inside now," he said quietly. "You're out of the heat." She nodded against his chest. Didn't let go. Rosa sat with Lily for the better part of 2 hours, while Jack stood out in the hallway and tried to figure out what to do next. The girl drank 3 glasses of water and ate half a bowl of broth, and Rosa reported that other than dehydration and some nasty blistering on her feet, she seemed physically intact. No broken bones. No obvious injuries beyond what the sun and the ground had done to her. But there were older bruises. Rosa came out into the hallway and pulled the door halfway shut behind her, and she told him that in a voice that was very quiet and very careful, and Jack listened without moving. "Her upper arms," Rosa said. "Both sides. And her left shoulder. They're not fresh." Jack looked at the closed door. "She let me see," he asked. "She didn't try to hide them from me." Rosa's voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. "Jack, someone hurt this child." "Yeah." He looked at the door a moment longer. "I know. What are we going to do?" He pushed off the wall. "First, I'm going to talk to her. Then I'm going to find out who she belongs to. Then—" He stopped, corrected himself. "Then I'm going to figure out what happens next." Rosa caught his arm as he reached for the door handle. "Be gentle with her," she said. "Whatever she tells you, I'm always gentle. Rosa gave him a look that said she had some opinions about that, but she stepped aside. Lily was sitting up against the headboard when he came in, her hands folded in her lap, watching the door like she'd been expecting him. She'd been cleaned up a little, face washed, hair combed back, and someone Rosa, he guessed, had found a clean shirt that swamped her small frame. The bruises on her arms were visible above the short sleeves. Jack didn't look at them directly. He pulled the chair from the corner over to the side of the bed and sat down, and he kept his hands loose on his knees and his voice easy. "Feeling any better?" "Yes, sir." Formal. Careful. "You don't have to call me sir. Jack's fine." He paused. "You up for talking a little?" She studied him for a long moment. That same measuring look she'd given him on the trail. He had the impression she was very good at reading people, the kind of skill a child develops when reading people wrong carries consequences. "Okay," she said. "Your stepmother, what's her name? Diane Harper. And you're Lily Harper." "Yes. Your daddy." Something moved across her face. Brief, but real. "He died 2 years ago. His name was Thomas Harper." "I'm sorry." He meant it. "Any other family?" "No." She said it simply, like she'd accepted it long ago. "Just Diane." "How long have you been with Diane?" "Since I was 6, after Daddy died." She looked down at her folded hands. "She didn't want me. She said so. But she got the house and she got the money, and I came with it, I guess." Jack kept his expression even with considerable effort. "Where are you from, Lily? Where do you normally live?" "Abilene. We drove out here yesterday. She said she was taking me to see a cousin." A pause. "There wasn't any cousin. I figured that out when she stopped on that road and told me to get out." "She told you to get out of the car. She said she needed to stretch her legs, said I should get some air." Lily's voice remained flat and steady, and that steadiness told Jack more than tears would have. "Then she got back in, and she drove away. I walked for a long time. I don't know how long. Then I fell." Jack leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "Did she take anything with you? A bag, any water?" "No." He let out a slow breath through his nose. "Lily, the bruises on your arms. Can you tell me about those?" The hands in her lap tightened, just for a second. Then they relaxed deliberately, and he watched her make herself do that. Watched a 9-year-old consciously choose to be calm, and something inside him went very, very quiet. "She gets angry sometimes," Lily said. "Does she hit you?" "Sometimes." "Often?" A longer pause this time. "Yes, sir." The sir slipped out. She didn't correct it. "More since Daddy died." Jack didn't move. He didn't let what he was feeling reach his face, because he'd learned a long time ago that showing anger in front of someone who was afraid of anger was exactly the wrong thing to do. But inside him something was burning slow and hot, with the particular patient quality of a fire that isn't in any hurry because it knows it's going to burn a long time. "Okay," he said. "Thank you for telling me. Are you going to call her?" Lily asked. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes didn't. Her eyes were asking the real question. "Are you going to send me back?" "I'm going to call the sheriff," Jack said. "Because what she did is against the law. And I'm going to have a doctor come out here to look at you because that's what needs to happen. But I need you to hear me on something." He held her gaze. "You are not going back to that woman. Not today, and not until we know you're going somewhere safe. You understand me?" Lily stared at him. She had the expression of a child who had been promised things before and learned not to believe them. He held her gaze and let her look as long as she needed to. "You mean that?" she finally said. "I mean that." She looked at him for another 3 seconds. Then she nodded once and looked back down at her hands, and the breath she let out was so long and so deep that it was almost painful to watch. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." Tess. He made 2 calls from the hallway, keeping his voice low and his back to the guest room door. The first was to Doc Elias Pryor in town, who agreed to drive out within the hour without Jack having to explain much. The second was to Sheriff Harlan Webb, who listened to the whole account without interrupting, and then said, "Jack, you understand this is going to get complicated." "I understand." "The woman's got legal custody, until a court says otherwise." "I know the law, Harlan." A pause. "I'm just saying, my hands aren't entirely free here. I got to follow procedure." "Then follow it." Jack kept his voice level. "But you come out here with paperwork to take that child anywhere before a court's had a look at this situation, and I'll have my lawyer on the phone before you hit my front gate. We clear?" Another pause, longer this time. Harlan Webb had known Jack Callahan for 30 years, and he knew what it meant when the man used that particular tone. "I'll look into it," he said carefully. "Give me some time." "You've got until morning." He hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment, one hand pressed flat against the wall, breathing. Then Rosa appeared at the far end of the hall with a look on her face that he knew well. "She's asking for you," she said. "The girl." He pushed off the wall and went back. Lily was still sitting in the same position, but she'd pulled her knees up to her chest. She had the look of someone who had been thinking hard. "Can I ask you something?" she said as he sat back down. "Go ahead." "Why did you stop?" She was watching him with those old, careful green eyes. "On the trail. You didn't have to stop." Jack thought about how to answer that. He settled on the truth. "My horse stopped first," he said. She considered that. "Ranger." "That's right." "He stopped because of me." "Seems like." She was quiet for a moment. "Horses know things," she said. It wasn't a question. "They do," Jack agreed. She rested her chin on her knees. "My daddy used to say that. He had a horse named Buck. He said Buck always knew when something was wrong before people did." "Your daddy sounds like a smart man." He was. The grief in her voice was old and settled, not raw. She'd been carrying it long enough that she knew its shape. "He would have been mad," she added. "About today, about what she did." "Yeah," Jack said. "I imagine he would. He made me promise something before he died." She said it carefully, like she'd turned this over many times. "He said no matter what happened, I should keep going. He said the trail gets hard, Lilybug, but it doesn't stay hard forever. He called me Lilybug." She paused. "I almost stopped today, on the trail. I almost just lay down and stopped." Jack held very still. "But I didn't," she said. "And then you came." He didn't say anything for a moment. There wasn't anything equal to that moment that he could have said. "Your daddy was right," he said finally. "The trail doesn't stay hard forever." She looked up at him. Something in her face had shifted slightly, not open, not trusting yet, not after one afternoon, but something had moved in that direction. "Rosa said supper's almost ready," she said. He nodded. "Think you can eat something?" "Yes, sir." She unfolded her legs and swung them over the side of the bed. Her blistered feet hit the floor and she winced, but didn't make a sound. And that small, stubborn silence told him more about Lily Harper than anything she'd said all afternoon. She'd been taught to be quiet about pain. He was going to have a great deal to say about that eventually to the woman who'd taught her, but that was for another day. Right now, there was a girl who hadn't eaten a real meal in God knows how long, and Rosa's kitchen was the safest place in West Texas, and that was enough to work with. He stood and held out his hand. She looked at it for exactly 1 second. Then she took it, and together they walked down the hall toward the warm smell of food and the sound of Rosa singing low to herself in the kitchen, and outside the windows, the Texas summer blazed on, indifferent and merciless, as it always was, not knowing or caring what it had very nearly taken today. But it hadn't taken her. She was here. And Jack Callahan, who had built his life on knowing which things were worth fighting for, had already made up his mind about what came next. Doc Pryor arrived at 6:30, black bag in hand, and he didn't ask unnecessary questions. That was one thing Jack had always appreciated about Elias Pryor. The man had been practicing medicine in this county for 30 years. and he'd learned that the story usually told itself if you were patient enough to wait for it. He examined Lily in the guest room while Jack and Rosa waited in the kitchen. It took 20 minutes. When he came out, he set his bag on the table and looked at Jack with an expression that Jack had never particularly wanted to see on a doctor's face. "Dehydration's manageable," Pryor said. "She'll be sore for a few days from the sun exposure, and those feet need to be kept clean." "But Jack—" He stopped, chose his next words carefully. "The bruising on her arms isn't from one incident. I'm seeing marks at different stages of healing. Some are a week old, some older than that." Rosa made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "She say anything to you?" Jack asked. "She said she falls a lot." Pryor looked at him steadily. 9-year-olds do fall, Jack, but not like this. "What do we do?" "I'm going to write up my findings tonight and file a medical report with the county. That's my legal obligation." He picked up his bag. "Beyond that, it's in your hands and Harlan's. But I'll tell you this." He paused at the kitchen doorway. "Whatever you're planning to do for that child, do it fast. Because whoever left her out there isn't going to stay gone forever." He was right about that, more right than any of them knew yet. Jack walked him out and stood on the porch for a long moment after the headlights disappeared down the drive. The night had come on fast the way it does in Texas in the summer. 1 minute, the sky is burning orange at the edges, and then the dark just drops. He stood in it and thought about Diane Harper, a woman he had never met, and felt the slow, patient fire in him burn a little hotter. Behind him, the screen door opened. He turned. Lily stood in the doorway barefoot, wrapped in one of Rosa's spare shawls that came down to her knees. She had the look of someone who'd tried to sleep and found it wasn't ready to come. "You should be resting," he said. "I know." She didn't move. "Is the doctor going to tell someone where I am?" Jack came back to the porch and leaned against the rail so he wasn't looking down at her. "He filed a report. That means the county knows you're here and you're safe. That's a good thing." She was quiet for a moment. "Will she find out?" "Lily." He kept his voice even. "You let me worry about that part." She looked at him with those dark green eyes. "She has a lawyer," she said. "A real one. She talked about him sometimes. She said he could make anything disappear." That landed with a weight she probably didn't intend. Jack held her gaze. "So do I," he said. Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly. More like someone who'd been braced for a hit that didn't come. "Okay," she said softly. And then, "Rosa left food on the stove. She said you didn't eat either." Despite everything, the corner of his mouth moved. "She'd tell you to come get me. She told me to tell you that a man who doesn't eat makes poor decisions." She delivered this with total seriousness. Her words. Sounds about right. He pushed off the rail. "Come on then." They ate together at the kitchen table, Jack and Lily, and the particular quiet of a house that is trying to figure out what it's becoming. Lily ate slowly at first, like she was waiting for someone to tell her to stop, and then hunger overruled caution, and she finished everything in the bowl and accepted a second helping without being asked twice. Jack watched her, without watching her, the way you learn to observe a skittish animal. Peripheral and patient, and what he saw made something ache deep in his chest, in a place he hadn't used in a long time. She thanked Rosa twice for the food, cleared her own bowl without being told, folded the shawl neatly when she took it off and set it on the chair beside her. Small, careful habits. The habits of a child who had learned that taking up space was dangerous. "You do that at home?" he asked. "Help clean up." She glanced at him. "Yes, sir." "Diane make you—" A brief pause. "If I didn't, there were consequences." He nodded slowly, didn't push. Filed it away with everything else. Rosa appeared from the back of the kitchen and planted both hands on the table and looked at Lily with the particular directness that was Rosa's way of showing she cared. "You sleep in that room tonight and you don't worry about anything," she said. "You hear me? Nothing comes through this house without going through Jack first, and nothing goes through Jack." Lily looked at Rosa, then at Jack, then back at Rosa. You work for him a long time. 20 years. Do you trust him, hey? Rosa didn't even blink. With my life. And I'm a woman who does not say that lightly. Lily considered this with the gravity of someone making a very significant calculation. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. And that one word said in that particular way told Jack that something had been decided in her that hadn't been decided before. She went to bed without a fuss. Rosa checked on her twice before the house went fully quiet. Jack sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and his phone and thought about his next move. He called his lawyer at 9:30. Mitchell Hale picked up on the second ring because Mitchell Hale was the kind of man who understood that Jack Callahan didn't call after 9 unless it mattered. Talk to me, Mitchell said. Jack talked. He laid out the whole day, the trail, the girl, the bruises, what the doctor had said, what Lily had said. Mitchell listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons Jack paid him what he paid him. When Jack finished, there was a short silence. Then Mitchell said, "The stepmother has legal custody." "I'm aware." "Which means right now, technically, you're housing a minor without authorization. The moment she reports the girl missing, she left that girl on a dirt road to die, Mitchell." "I know. And that matters enormously, but it matters in a courtroom, not in my office at 9:30 on a Tuesday." Mitchell's voice was careful, not cold. "I'm on your side, Jack. I need you to understand the landscape. She could call the sheriff tonight and claim the child wandered off and she's been searching. She could spin this any way she wants until we get in front of a judge. Then get us in front of a judge. I'm working on it. I'll have an emergency petition filed by morning. Temporary protective custody. I've got grounds with the medical report alone. But Jack," he paused, "prepare yourself. This woman is going to fight. Let her." Another pause. "You know something about this situation I don't." Jack thought about what Lily had said. She has a real lawyer. She said he could make anything disappear. "Maybe," he said. "I'll know more tomorrow." He hung up and sat with the quiet for a while. Then he went to bed. He didn't sleep much. Morning came hard and bright, and with it came the first sign that Mitchell Hale's warning had not been an exaggeration. Rosa found the note under the front gate just before 7. It wasn't a note exactly, it was a legal document. A formal demand on the letterhead of a firm in Dallas that Jack recognized because he'd heard of them the way you hear of bad weather coming by reputation before you see it. The document stated that Diane Harper, legal guardian of one Lillian Harper, age 9, had reason to believe the child was being unlawfully detained at Callahan Flats Ranch and demanded her immediate return or faced legal consequences to be determined by a court of law. It also stated that Lily Harper had a history of, and Jack read this part very carefully twice, compulsive dishonesty, emotional instability, and behavioral problems that posed a risk to herself and others. He read that last part, standing in the kitchen in his boots and his work shirt, and he set the paper down on the table very carefully, and he was still standing there when Rosa came in and looked at his face and quietly took the paper to read herself. She put it down, looked up at him. "Mentirosa," she said, which needed no translation. "Yeah," Jack said. "Jack." Rosa's voice was low. "She's already in town. Whoever delivered this, they were at that gate before sunrise." That was the part that mattered. Diane Harper hadn't come looking. She'd never come looking. She'd come prepared with a lawyer with a narrative already built with a legal document ready to go before the sun was fully up. That wasn't a grieving mother searching for a lost child. That was a strategy. He called Mitchell at 7:02. "She's already moved," he said. "I know. I got a call at 6:45 from the county clerk. She filed first, Jack. Petition for immediate return of a minor." Jack's jaw tightened. Can she do that? She filed it. Whether it holds is another question, but the hearing's been set for tomorrow afternoon. A pause. Her lawyer is Preston Wade. The name sat in the air like something with weight. Preston Wade was the kind of lawyer who showed up when someone had real money and no moral objections to how it got spent. He was very good, and he was very expensive, and he had a record in family courts across 3 states that made a lot of good judges look the other way. "I know the name," Jack said. "Everybody in Texas knows the name. I'm not going to lie to you, this is a harder fight than it was at 9:30 last night. Can we win? We can win. But I need everything. The doctors report your account any witnesses, and I need Lily if she's willing to speak." He stopped. "She's 9, Jack. Nobody's going to force her." "I'll talk to her." He went to the guest room and knocked twice before pushing the door open a few inches. Lily was already awake, sitting up in bed with her knees pulled to her chest, and from the look on her face, he wasn't sure she'd slept at all. "She's here, isn't she?" Lily said. It wasn't a question. Jack came in and sat in the chair. He didn't try to soften it. He'd made a judgment call the night before that this child deserved honesty, and he wasn't changing that now. "She filed papers this morning. She wants you back." Lily's face didn't crumble. It went very still, the way a person goes still when they're fighting something hard from the inside. "What does that mean?" "It means there's a hearing tomorrow. A judge is going to decide where you go." He kept his voice steady. "My lawyer is very good. We have the doctor's report. We have what you told me." He paused. "He says it would help if you were willing to speak, in front of the judge." The room was quiet. "She'll be there?" Lily asked. "Most likely." "And her lawyer?" "Yes." Lily was silent for a long moment, staring at something past his shoulder. Then she said, "She told everyone I lie. She's been saying it for a long time. She says it so much that people believe it." She looked at him. "What if they believe her instead of me?" "Then I'll fight harder," he said. "But Lily, the truth has a way of holding up better than lies do when someone looks at it closely enough, and this judge is going to look closely." "How do you know?" "Because I've got a very expensive lawyer making sure of it." He said it plain, and she almost smiled. Almost. "And because the doctor's report backs up everything you said, and because I was there on that trail, and I'm going to stand up and say what I found." He leaned forward slightly. "You're not alone in this room anymore. You understand what I'm telling you." She held his gaze for a long moment, then her chin lifted just barely, just enough, and something behind her eyes steadied. "I'll talk to the judge," she said. He nodded. "Okay. But I want to say one thing first." She said it carefully, precisely, with the particular deliberateness of someone who has thought very hard about a sentence before speaking it out loud. "She's going to say things about my daddy, about his money. She does that when she needs people to be on her side." She paused. "My daddy left me something, a letter. She doesn't know I know about it. I hid it before she took the rest of his things." Jack went very still. "A letter." "Letters," Lily corrected. 3 of them. I keep them." She reached under the mattress, and her hand came back with an envelope worn at the edges, folded and refolded many times. She held it out. "I don't know if they matter, but he wrote them for me, and some of what he wrote—" She stopped, swallowed. He knew something was wrong with her. He wrote it down. Jack looked at the envelope in her outstretched hand. This was the moment. He understood that with the clarity you only get when you've made enough decisions to recognize a hinge when you're standing on one. This child who had been left on a burning road to disappear, who had been called a liar for years by the woman who was supposed to protect her, was handing him the one thing she had left of her father, trusting him with it. He reached out and took it carefully. "I'm going to make sure your lawyer sees this today," he said. "And I'm going to make sure it's protected." He met her eyes. "Your daddy trusted you with this. I'm going to honor that." Her throat moved. "He said I was smart enough to know when to use it." She paused. "I think now is when." Jack looked at the envelope in his hand. 3 letters from a dead man to his daughter tucked under a mattress by a 9-year-old who'd understood their importance without being told, and thought that Thomas Harper had been smarter than most people alive, because the daughter he'd raised was the smartest person in any room she'd been in since the day she was born. "Yeah," he said quietly. I think you're right. He stood. And then something stopped him at the door, a pull he couldn't entirely name, and he turned back. Lily, whatever happens tomorrow in that courtroom, I need you to hear me say this once out loud, so there's no question later. He held her gaze. You're not going back to her. Not over anything I've got left to spend. You clear on that? She looked at him for a long, long moment. And for the first time since he'd found her face down in the July dust on a trail that crossed his land, something in her face let go. Not all the way. Not the kind of letting go that happens all at once, but a beginning of it, the first loosening of something that had been held too tight for too long. Yes, sir, she said. And this time she meant it as something other than caution. She meant it as trust. He walked out of that room with a dead man's letters in his hand and a hearing in 24 hours, and Preston Wade on the other side of it, and he wasn't afraid. He was something else entirely, a thing with harder edges and a clearer purpose. The thing a person becomes when they stop thinking about what they stand to lose and start thinking only about what they refuse to surrender. And somewhere in a hotel room in town, Diane Harper was already on the phone with her lawyer arranging the story she planned to tell a judge tomorrow. Arranging the performance. Polishing the lies. She had no idea what was in that envelope. She was about to find out. Mitchell Hale read Thomas Harper's letters 3 times without saying a word. Jack sat across from him in the ranch office with his coffee going cold and watched the man's face move through something that experienced lawyers rarely let show genuine surprise, followed by the slow, deliberate tightening of someone who has just realized the game changed while they weren't looking. Mitchell set the letters down. Looked up. Where did she get these? She hid them before Diane took everything else. Jack. Mitchell picked up the top letter again. Thomas Harper knew. He knew before he died that she was planning to contest the inheritance structure. He wrote it out. Names, dates, his specific concerns about what Diane would do to access Lily's trust. He tapped the paper. He also states clearly in his own handwriting that he feared for his daughter's physical safety in Diane's care if he died. The room was very still. He feared for her safety, Jack repeated. He wrote it plain. He says right here I have witnessed Diane strike Lily twice in my presence. I believe it happens more often when I am not home. I am changing my will accordingly and intend to petition for a guardian appointment for Lily that removes Diane from any custodial role. I have not yet done so. I am writing this down so there is a record if something happens to me before I can act. Mitchell set the letter on the desk. He died 6 weeks after this was written. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. She knew about the will change, Jack said. I think she found out before he filed it, which means it never went through, which means Diane kept custody and kept access to the estate. Mitchell's voice was careful and precise, the way it got when he was building something. The trust itself, Lily's portion from her father's life insurance, and the sale of a property sits at just under $500,000. Diane has been drawing from it as appointed guardian. Legal, but barely, and only because nobody was watching closely enough. Jack looked at him. $500,000. Just under. Mitchell leaned back. This isn't a woman who got tired of a difficult child, Jack. This is a woman who needed that child gone before she turned 18 and the trust reverted to Lily's full control, before anyone started asking questions about the withdrawals. He paused. She didn't abandon her on that road in a fit of rage. She planned it. The fire in Jack's chest had been slow and patient for 2 days. Right now, it wasn't either of those things. Can you use this? He asked. Can I use a dead man's handwritten account naming her as a threat to his daughter's safety, combined with a medical report showing systematic bruising, combined with the fact that she left a 9-year-old child in 98-degree heat on a remote road with no water? Mitchell almost smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Preston Wade's going to earn every dollar he charges her today. The county courthouse was a limestone building that had seen 100 years of hard decisions. And by 9 the next morning, the hall outside the family courtroom was full in a way that small-town courthouses get when word travels fast, and the story is the right kind of ugly. Jack walked in with Mitchell on one side, and Rosa, who had insisted on coming, and whom nobody with any sense argued with, on the other. Lily walked beside Jack. She'd asked that morning if she could hold his hand walking in, and she'd asked it the same careful way she asked for everything, like she expected to be told no, and he'd held out his hand without a word, and she'd taken it, and that was that. She was wearing a clean dress Rosa had gone into town to buy the evening before. Her hair was brushed. Her feet were in proper shoes. She looked, Jack thought, exactly like what she was. A small, serious, extraordinarily composed child who had decided she was not going to let this room see her afraid. He was more proud of her in that moment than he had words for. Diane Harper was already seated at the plaintiff's table. Jack had built a picture of her in his mind over the past 2 days, something sharp-edged and cold, something that looked like what it was when you knew what to look for. The reality was more unsettling. Diane Harper was a trim woman in her early 40s in a tasteful gray suit with careful hair and careful makeup, and the expression of someone in tremendous pain that they are bravely holding together. She looked to any stranger in that room like a mother at the end of her rope, like a woman who had tried everything and was here as a last resort. She looked the part perfectly. That was the most dangerous thing about her. Preston Wade sat beside her. He was exactly what his reputation promised: silver-haired, unhurried, expensive, in the way that doesn't need to announce itself. He glanced at Jack once when they came in, then looked away, which was its own kind of message. Jack guided Lily to their table and felt her hand tighten in his for just a second before she let go and sat down straight-backed in her chair. He sat beside her. Across the room, Diane Harper turned her head and looked at Lily with an expression so perfectly calibrated to wounded maternal love that Jack had to look away before he did something that would help nobody. Lily did not look at Diane. She looked straight ahead. Mitchell leaned close to Jack. "She's going to perform today," he said quietly. "Let her. Every minute she performs, the letters get more powerful by comparison." The judge was a woman named Eleanor Marsh, 60 years old, with reading glasses on a chain, and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who had heard every version of every story and retained the ability to tell the difference. Jack took that as a good sign. Mitchell had told him that Marsh had a reputation for cutting through exactly the kind of theatrical courtroom presentation that Preston Wade specialized in. They were about to find out. Wade opened for Diane's side with a smooth, sorrowing account of a devoted stepmother driven to desperation by a child with, and he used the phrase, without apology, documented behavioral difficulties. He spoke of Diane's tireless efforts, her patience, her years of sacrifice. He spoke of the incident on the road as a deeply regrettable miscommunication during a period of acute family stress. He said miscommunication with the practiced ease of a man who had said it in front of judges many times before. Rosa, seated in the gallery behind Jack, made a sound that was very quiet and not remotely polite. Jack did not turn around. He heard it and he agreed with it, and he kept his face professionally blank. Wade called Diane to the stand. She was extraordinary at it. Jack would give her that. She cried at exactly the right moments, never too much, never melodramatically, just enough to seem like a woman working very hard to hold herself together. She described Lily as troubled since her father's passing. She described incidents fabricated Jack knew, but delivered with the specific detail that makes fabrications convincing of Lily's lying, her outbursts, her unpredictability. She described the day on the road as stopping to get gas, a moment of confusion, not realizing Lily had gotten out of the car, driving a short distance before discovering. "Mrs. Harper." Judge Marsh's voice cut across the testimony without rising. "You drove how far before you noticed the child was not in the vehicle?" A pause. Diane's composure flickered just barely. "A short distance, Your Honor. Perhaps a mile. And the child was found approximately 4 miles from the nearest gas station, in a state of serious dehydration, without shoes, without water, and without any sign that a search had been initiated." Marsh looked at her over the glasses. "Can you help me understand the gap?" Wade was on his feet smoothly. "Your Honor, my client was in a state of extreme distress. I'll hear from your client, Mr. Wade, thank you." Marsh looked back at Diane. The silence in the courtroom was the particular kind that happens when something cracks in a performance and everyone in the room hears it at the same moment. Diane recovered. She was good enough to recover. She produced an explanation that was technically plausible and emotionally delivered, and Wade moved quickly to redirect and shore up what had started to lean. By the time he sat down, the performance was intact again, but it was the first crack, and Jack had been watching Judge Marsh's face when it happened. Mitchell opened their case with the medical report. He walked Dr. Pryor through every finding: the dehydration, the sun exposure, the blistering, and then the bruising. The different stages of healing. The pattern consistent with repeated physical contact over an extended period. Pryor testified steadily and without embellishment, the way doctors do when they're saying something hard and they know it needs no decoration. Wade cross-examined and did what he could, suggested the bruising could have other explanations implied. Pryor was drawing conclusions beyond his expertise, but the damage was done. Pryor was not a man who rattled, and his testimony sat in the room like a stone. Then Mitchell said, "Your Honor, we'd like to introduce Exhibit C." He laid Thomas Harper's letters on the record. Wade was on his feet before Mitchell finished the sentence. The objection was technical procedural delivered with great confidence. Marsh listened to it, looked at the letters, and overruled it in about 45 seconds. She read them herself right there at the bench, while the courtroom held its breath. Jack watched Diane Harper's face while the judge read. It was the single most revealing thing he'd seen in 2 days. Because Diane Harper didn't know what was in those letters. She'd taken everything when Thomas died, every paper, every file, every document, and she'd never known about the copies Lily had hidden. And she was looking at Mitchell Hale with an expression that was trying very hard to stay composed and wasn't entirely succeeding, and her eyes cut to Lily once, just once, with something in them that wasn't grief or love or any of the things she'd been performing all morning. Lily was still looking straight ahead. She didn't see it. Or maybe she did, and had decided it didn't matter anymore. Judge Marsh set the letters down. She looked at Diane. Then she looked at Preston Wade. Then she said with the kind of quietness that is much more alarming than volume, "Mr. Wade, I'd like to take a brief recess." Wade's jaw moved. "Of course, Your Honor." The gavel came down. People stood. Jack leaned close to Mitchell. "Is that good?" It means she read something she needed time to think about. Mitchell was already pulling papers together. "Yes, that's good." During the recess, Jack went to get Lily a glass of water from the hallway table. He turned around and found Diane Harper standing 3 feet away from him. She'd come alone. No Wade, no assistant. She'd moved fast and quiet, and she was looking at him with an expression that had shed most of its performance. Up close without the courtroom audience, she looked harder. More like what she was. "Mr. Callahan," she said. Her voice was low. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." Jack looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I found a 9-year-old child on her back in a dirt road. I understand exactly what I've gotten into. She lies. She's been doing it since before Thomas died. She manipulates. Mrs. Harper." He kept his voice very quiet and very level. "You're talking to the wrong man. I was there when your lawyer called it a miscommunication. I've read what your husband wrote about you. I've seen what a doctor put in writing about your daughter's arms." He looked at her steadily. "Whatever you're selling right now, I'm not buying it, and I'd go back in that courtroom if I were you because your lawyer's looking for you." She stared at him. The mask slipped completely for 3 full seconds, and what was underneath it was cold and calculating and entirely without the warmth she'd been manufacturing all morning. Then it came back up. She smoothed her jacket. She turned and walked away. Jack stood where he was for a moment. Then he carried the water back to Lily. "She talked to you," Lily said quietly without looking up. "Yep." "What did she say?" "Nothing worth repeating." He set the water in front of her. "You okay?" "Yes." She picked up the water, set it down, picked it up again. "When I go up there," she said, "she's going to look at me the whole time. She does that. She thinks it scares me. Does it? A pause. It used to. She looked up at him. Not anymore. When court reconvened, Mitchell called Lily to the stand. The room got very quiet. The kind of quiet that has texture to it that you can feel on your skin. Lily walked to the stand with the same straight back she'd had all morning, and she sat down, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she looked at Mitchell Hale, and waited. Mitchell walked her through it gently, carefully, asking questions that let her tell it in her own words. When she was abandoned, what Diane had said, what she'd done to try to survive. The walking, the falling, the canteen that was already empty. He asked her about the bruises, and she answered without flinching. Specific, precise dates, she remembered incidents she described with the calm accuracy of someone who had survived them by cataloging them. Wade cross-examined. He was careful with her. He was smart enough to know that a jury will forgive a lawyer who goes hard on an adult and will never forgive one who goes hard on a 9-year-old. But he pushed on the inconsistencies. He could find implied, she'd misunderstood, suggested her memory was unreliable. Lily answered every question, calm, precise. She didn't get angry, and she didn't get tearful, and she didn't back down. When Wade suggested that her account of the bruises might be an exaggeration, she said simply, and without heat, "Dr. Pryor took photographs. You can look at them." There was a sound from the gallery. Someone stifling something. Wade shifted his approach. "Lily, did your father ever tell you about his will?" "Some." "Did he ever discuss the trust with you?" "He told me he'd set money aside for when I grew up. He said it was so I'd always have a start." She paused. "He said some people would try to take it. He said to be careful." She looked at Wade directly. He was right. The silence in the room lasted long enough to be its own statement. Wade said, "No further questions," and sat down faster than he'd moved all morning. Judge Marsh looked at Lily for a moment before she spoke. Not the way a judge looks at a witness. Something more than that. Something that had set down its professional distance for just 1 second. "Thank you, Lily," she said. "You may step down." Lily stepped down. She walked back to the table and sat beside Jack, and he felt her exhale once long and slow beside him. He didn't say anything. He put his hand on the table, palm up. She looked at it. Then she placed her hand in his and held on, and she didn't let go for the rest of what came next. Mitchell was already on his feet. He laid out the financial records, the trust withdrawals, the pattern of access, the timeline that put Diane Harper drawing significant sums in the months leading up to the abandonment. He laid it out clean and fast, connecting each piece to the letters, to the medical report, to Lily's testimony. He wasn't dramatic about it. He didn't need to be. Preston Wade objected 3 times. Marsh overruled 2 of them and sustained 1 on a technicality that didn't change the substance. By the time Mitchell sat down, the air in the room had changed completely. Jack could feel it, the shift that happens when a story stops being something people are deciding whether to believe and becomes something they already believe and are now deciding what to do about. Diane Harper sat at her table with her hands folded and her jaw set, and her performance reassembled over whatever was happening underneath it. But it was thinner now, like paper held up to light. Jack looked at her across the room. He thought about Thomas Harper, who had known and written it down and not quite gotten there in time. He thought about Lily, who had hidden those letters under a mattress and carried them through everything, waiting for the right moment with the instinct of someone her father had trusted to know. He thought about the fact that a 9-year-old girl had been smarter and braver than all the expensive machinery that had been working against her. Judge Marsh called a recess to consider her ruling. Mitchell sat back in his chair and said nothing, which was unusual for him. After a moment, he said quietly, "She's going to rule today. She's not taking this home." "How do you know?" Jack asked. "Because she's angry," Mitchell said. "Judges who are angry rule fast." He glanced at Jack. "That's a good thing in this case." Jack looked at Lily, who was sitting beside him with her hand still in his, staring straight ahead, at nothing in particular, with the focused expression of someone who has done everything they can and is now waiting for the world to respond. She'd done everything she could. She'd told the truth on a witness stand in front of the woman who'd tried to erase her, and she hadn't flinched, and she hadn't broken, and she'd been 9 years old doing it. Thomas Harper had said the trail gets hard, but it doesn't stay hard forever. The gavel was about to come down, and one way or another, this part of the trail was almost done. Judge Marsh came back into the courtroom 14 minutes after she left it. 14 minutes. Mitchell Hale had been practicing law for 26 years, and he told Jack afterward that he'd never seen a family court judge return that fast. Not for a ruling this complex, not with this much money and this many legal threads involved. 14 minutes meant she hadn't needed to think about the law. It meant she'd walked into that back room already knowing and spent the time making sure her language was airtight. The room stood when she entered, sat when she sat, and went so quiet that Jack could hear Lily breathing beside him. Marsh put on her reading glasses, looked at the papers in front of her. Then she took the glasses off and set them on the bench and looked up at the room, which was the thing she did when she wanted to speak without reading, when she wanted what she said to land as human words, not legal language. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by both parties in this proceeding," she began, including medical documentation, financial records, personal correspondence from the late Thomas Harper, and direct testimony from the minor child herself. She paused. "I want to say something before I issue this ruling, and I want both parties to hear it clearly." Preston Wade sat very still. Diane Harper's hands folded on the table in front of her, pressed together slightly harder. "This court does not take lightly the removal of a child from a custodial parent or guardian," Marsh said. "That action carries enormous consequence, and it is not one I approach casually. But this court also has one obligation above all others in a proceeding of this nature, and that obligation is to the child." She looked directly at Diane. "Not to financial arrangements, not to legal strategy, not to the performance of grief, to the child." The word performance hit the room like a stone hitting water. Jack felt it ripple. "Based on the totality of evidence presented today," Marsh continued, "this court finds that Diane Marie Harper has engaged in a sustained pattern of physical abuse against Lily Ann Harper, has deliberately misrepresented the circumstances of the child's abandonment, and has used her position as legal guardian to access trust funds established for the child's benefit in a manner inconsistent with that role." She picked up the papers again. "Accordingly, this court hereby issues the following orders." She read them in sequence, each one clean and final. Lily's custody was immediately and permanently transferred from Diane Harper to the jurisdiction of the Texas Department of Family Services, pending a permanent placement determination. Diane Harper's access to Lily's trust was frozen effective immediately pending a full financial audit. A criminal referral was being forwarded to the county district attorney's office on charges including child endangerment and financial fraud. And then she stopped, set the papers down again, looked out at the room with the expression of a woman who had one more thing to say that wasn't in any document. "Lily," she said. Lily's hand tightened around Jack's fingers. "You testified today with more clarity and more courage than most adults I see in this courtroom," Marsh said. "Your father clearly knew who you were. This court sees it too." A pause. "You're safe now. That's what I want you to hear." The sound that came from somewhere in the gallery was quickly muffled. Rosa Jack suspected was not entirely successful in that effort. Lily sat very still for 3 full seconds. Then she exhaled slowly, completely, and some of the rigid straightness went out of her spine. Not collapsing, but settling like a person who has been holding a weight at arm's length and has finally been told they can set it down. "Okay," she said so quietly, only Jack and Mitchell could hear it. The gavel came down. Across the room, Preston Wade was already leaning close to Diane Harper, speaking fast and low. Diane wasn't listening to him. She was looking at Lily with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of the performance she'd been giving all morning. It was naked now, and what was naked in it was not grief and not love. It was the particular calculating anger of a person who has just watched something they were certain they had controlled slip entirely out of their hands. She stood. Wade put a hand on her arm. She pulled it free. "This isn't over," she said. Not loudly, not theatrically. She said it the way a person states a fact they intend to act on, and it was aimed at Jack across the room with the precision of a woman who had decided he was the specific obstacle between her and what she wanted. Jack looked back at her. He said nothing. There was nothing to say to that, which the last hour hadn't already said better. A bailiff moved toward the table. Wade intercepted, smoothly redirected, managed the exit with the practiced efficiency of a man who had managed difficult clients out of difficult situations many times before. Diane went. The doors closed. Mitchell was already on his phone. Jack turned to Lily. She was looking at the door where Diane had gone. Her expression was unreadable for a moment. Not afraid, not relieved, something more complicated than either of those things. Then she turned to Jack and said, "She meant it. She doesn't stop." "I know," Jack said. "So what happens now?" "Now," Mitchell said, coming off his phone and sitting back down with the brisk energy of a man who had already moved on to the next problem. "The state has temporary custody, which means Lily goes into emergency foster placement pending a permanent determination." He stopped, looked at Jack. Unless what?" Lily asked. Mitchell looked at Jack. Jack looked at Lily. He'd thought about this since the night on the porch, when he'd stood in the dark and felt something settle in him that hadn't been settled before. He'd thought about it through the doctor's visit and the phone calls and the long hours before the hearing. He'd thought about it with the kind of thinking that isn't really thinking anymore, the kind that happens when something is already decided and the mind is just finding its way to the words. "I want to file for guardianship," Jack said. "Formal legal with the court. I want to be your guardian, Lily, while the permanent situation gets worked out. If that's something you'd want." Lily stared at him. "You can say no," he added, "and I'll make sure wherever you go is good and safe and someone checks on you. But I'm asking." The silence lasted long enough that Mitchell looked up from his papers. Rosa had come through the gate from the gallery and was standing just behind Jack's shoulder, and the room was almost empty now, just the four of them, and a bored court clerk gathering papers at the far end of the room. "You want to be my guardian?" Lily said slowly, like she was testing the weight of each word. Not just until something else comes along. No, not just until. I want to be responsible for you. I want you at the ranch while this gets settled. I want—" He stopped. Said the rest of it plainly because she deserved plain. "I want to make sure nobody puts you somewhere temporary and forgets about you. That's not going to happen on my watch." Lily looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Rosa. "Tell me the truth," she said to Rosa. "Not what you think I want to hear." Rosa crouched down so she was at eye level, took both of Lily's hands. "I have worked for this man for 20 years, she said. "I have seen him on his worst days and his best, and I am telling you he does not say things he does not mean, not ever." Lily looked back at Jack. Something in her face had gone very young for a moment, 9 years old without the armor, without the careful reading of rooms, and then it came back but softer than before. "Okay," she said. "Yes." Mitchell had the paperwork filed by 3 o'clock that afternoon. Dig. The drive back to Callahan Flats was quieter than the drive into town had been. Lily sat in the back seat next to Rosa, who had produced from somewhere in her enormous purse a small bag of butter candies that she offered without comment. Lily took one and ate it, and then after a while took another. Jack drove and thought about Diane Harper's face when she said this isn't over. He thought about the financial audit that was now moving through the county system and what it was likely to find. He thought about the DA's office and what a child endangerment charge looked like in Texas and what fraud charges added to it. He was not a man who believed in celebrating before things were finished, and this wasn't finished. But Lily was in his back seat eating butter candy, and that was something. His phone rang. He picked up, saw it was Mitchell, and answered it on speaker. "Talk to me." "Two things." Mitchell's voice had the particular tone Jack had learned meant brace yourself. "First, Wade just filed a notice of appeal." Jack's jaw tightened. "On what grounds?" Rosa said before Jack could. procedural objections to the admission of the letters. He's arguing the chain of custody wasn't established properly. It's thin, but it's enough to get a hearing. Mitchell paused. Second thing. And Jack, this one is bigger. Another pause. The DA's office called me 20 minutes ago. They've had a file on Diane Harper for 4 months. Financial fraud, different jurisdiction, different victim. She's done this before. The truck was very quiet. Done what before? Jack said. Married into money. Positioned herself as a caretaker. Found a way to access the estate. The last time the victim was an elderly widower in Amarillo. He died before anything was filed. His family's been trying to build a case ever since. Mitchell's voice was measured. They've been waiting for something like today. A fresh incident with documented evidence. Your case just handed them exactly what they needed. Jack looked in the rearview mirror. Lily was listening. She had gone very still, the butter candy forgotten in her hand, and she was looking at the back of his headrest with an expression that was working through something in real time. She did it to someone else, Lily said quietly. Not a question. Jack met her eyes in the mirror. Sounds like it, yeah. Before my daddy. The word before landed with everything it implied. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Lily, Mitchell said carefully, we don't know the full picture yet. The DA is still... She married my daddy because of the money, Lily said. She said it the way people say things they've suspected a long time and are just now saying out loud for the first time. I always thought so. He was good. He was really good, and she was nice to him when she needed to be. But she was always watching what was his. She paused. I told him once. I was 7. I said there was something wrong with her eyes when she looked at his things. He said I was very perceptive. She stopped. I didn't know what that word meant then. It means you were right, Jack said. She looked at his reflection in the mirror. She might have helped him die, she said, and her voice was absolutely steady when she said it. The silence in the truck lasted until Mitchell said quietly, The DA is looking at that. That's all I can say right now. Lily nodded once. Then she looked out the window, and she was quiet for the rest of the drive. Jeez. They pulled through the gate of Callahan Flats in the late afternoon, and the land was the same land it always was, wide and flat and baked pale by the summer, the kind of land that makes no promises, but keeps the ones the sky makes for it. Lily looked out at it, and Jack watched her face in the mirror, and something in her expression was different from the way she'd looked at it that first night. Like it was starting to look familiar. Rosa went to the kitchen without being asked. Jack and Lily stood in the front room, and after a moment, Lily sat down on the bench by the window and looked at her hands. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. If the appeal works... She stopped. Started again. If she finds a way to use the appeal to take me out of here... She looked up at him. What do you do? Jack pulled a chair over and sat down across from her. He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at her directly, the way he always did when she asked him something real. I fight harder, he said. But what if... Lily? He waited until she met his eyes. I'm going to tell you something I need you to hold on to. The appeal is thin. Mitchell said so. Wade is throwing it because that's what lawyers do when they lose. They look for any door that's still cracked. But Thomas Harper's letters are in the record now. The medical report is in the record. Your testimony is in the record. He paused. None of that goes away. An appeal can challenge procedure. It cannot challenge the truth. She looked at him for a long moment. You sound very sure. I am sure. He paused. Are you... She thought about it. Actually thought about it with the deliberate honesty she applied to everything. About the truth, yes. She looked down. About what happens to truth when enough money pushes against it. A pause. Less sure. That's fair, he said. That's a smart thing to be unsure about. He leaned forward slightly. But here's what I know from 38 years of watching this world work. Money can delay truth. It can make it expensive to get to. It can put it behind procedures and appeals and continuances that wear people down. He met her eyes. But the people it wears down are the ones who are alone. And you are not alone. You understand me." She looked at him, really looked at him the way she had on the trail that first afternoon, measuring, calculating, deciding whether she had the evidence to believe. And then something in her face shifted the same way it had shifted then. In the same direction, but further, noticeably further. "I understand you," she said. From the kitchen came the sound of Rosa singing, and the smell of something with garlic and warm spice, and Lily turned her head toward it, and something almost like ease moved across her face. "She always cooked like that?" she asked. "Every single night for 20 years. Even when it's just you, especially when it's just me. She says a man who eats well thinks better." Lily considered this with the gravity she applied to most things. "She's probably right," she said. And this time, the almost smile became an actual one, small, private, like something she wasn't entirely sure she had permission to do yet, but was trying out carefully. It was the first real smile Jack Callahan had seen from Lily Harper. It lasted about 3 seconds before she caught herself and put the careful face back on. But he'd seen it. Rosa, appearing in the kitchen doorway at exactly that moment, had seen it too. She caught Jack's eye and said nothing, but the look on her face said everything. It was after dinner, dishes done, and the house quiet when Mitchell called back. Jack took it in the office. Lily was in the guest room, her room, now he'd started thinking of it that way without deciding to, and Rosa had gone home. "Wade withdrew the appeal," Mitchell said. Jack sat forward. "Why?" "Because the DA called Preston Wade directly this afternoon and told him that if he continued to obstruct a proceeding connected to an active multi-jurisdictional fraud investigation, the DA would be looking very carefully at whether Wade himself had any prior knowledge of his client's activities." A pause. "Wade has a clean record he's very attached to. The appeal was gone in 2 hours." Jack let out a slow breath. "It's not over," Mitchell added. "The criminal case is going to take time. The financial audit will take time. But Lily's placement with you is secure, and Diane Harper is currently in a position where every legal move she makes draws more attention to herself." He paused. "She's not going to move on this again. Not right now. The cost-benefit stopped working in her favor about 4 hours ago." Jack sat with that for a moment. The slow, patient fire that had been burning in him since he'd found Lily on that trail, since he'd first understood what had been done to her, didn't go out. It didn't work like that, but it shifted, steadied, became something less urgent and more permanent. "Thank you, Mitchell," he said. "Thank Thomas Harper," Mitchell said. "Those letters won this." He hung up and sat in the quiet for a moment. Then he walked down the hall to Lily's room and knocked twice. "Come in." She was sitting up in bed with her knees pulled up, not sleeping, looking like she'd been waiting for news. He leaned in the doorway and told her simply the appeal was gone. Her placement was secure, and Diane Harper was now more occupied with her own legal problems than with pursuing anything further. Lily listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Is it really done?" she asked. "This part," he said. "Yeah, it's done." She looked at her hands. "My daddy used to say—" She stopped. "He used to say that the hardest part of any hard thing is the not knowing. He said once you know, you can work with it, even if what you know is bad." She paused. "I think I've been in the not knowing for a really long time." Jack looked at her. "How's it feel to know?" She thought about it. Then she said, "Like the first breath after you've been holding it a really long time." She looked up at him. "Scary. And good. At the same time." "Yeah," he said. "That sounds about right." She settled back against the pillow. He reached for the door. "Jack." He stopped. "Thank you." She said it plainly, without ceremony, the way she said everything that mattered. For stopping on the trail. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Outside the window, the Texas night was dark, and very large, and very full of stars, the way it gets this far from any city, the kind of sky that makes you feel small, and also somehow less alone. "Get some sleep. Lilybug," he said. He didn't know why he used it, the name her father had called her. It came out before he made any decision to say it from somewhere below the level of thought. Lily went very still. Then her face did something he hadn't seen it do before. It crumpled just for a second. Just 1 second before she pulled it back, and she pressed her lips together and nodded once and looked down at her hands. "Good night," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. He pulled the door gently shut and stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark. And he thought about Thomas Harper, who had loved his daughter enough to write down the truth and trust her to know what to do with it. Who had called her Lilybug and told her the trail doesn't stay hard forever. He'd been right about all of it. And tomorrow, the sun was going to come up on Callahan Flats the same way it always did, indifferent and blazing and without sentiment. And Lily Harper was going to be in the guest room off the kitchen, and there was going to be work to do and things to figure out and a legal process that still had miles to run. But she was here. She was safe. And something that had been empty in that limestone house for a very long time was not empty anymore. Jack Callahan walked to the end of the hall and turned off the light, and somewhere outside, Ranger shifted in his stall, and the Texas night held everything it held, all that space, all that dark, all those stars. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like too much quiet. It felt like enough. 3 weeks after the hearing, Mitchell Hale called with news that nobody had been expecting quite that fast. Jack was in the barn when his phone rang, and Lily was beside him, learning how to brush down Ranger the right way, long stroke shoulder to flank the way. Jack had shown her twice already, and she was practicing with the focused intensity she applied to everything she decided was worth learning. She'd stopped flinching around horses 4 days ago. Jack had noticed, but hadn't said anything, because some things you honor by not remarking on them. He stepped back from the stall and answered, "Mitchell?" The DA moved up the timeline. Mitchell's voice had the particular quality of someone delivering something larger than they'd anticipated. Diane Harper was arrested this morning in Dallas. Financial fraud 3 counts. Child endangerment. And Jack? He stopped. They added a charge this afternoon, wrongful death, the Amarillo case. The widower's family finally had enough to make it stick. Jack stood very still with the phone against his ear. She's being held without bail pending a psychiatric evaluation. Her assets are frozen. Preston Wade released her as a client this morning. Apparently, there are limits even for him. A pause. It's over, Jack. She's not coming back from this. He hung up and stood in the quiet of the barn for a moment. Then he turned around. Lily was watching him from Ranger's stall with the brush in her hand, and her eyes reading his face the way she always read faces carefully from long practice, missing nothing. "Tell me," she said. He did. He told her all of it plain and straight, the same way he'd told her everything since the first night on the porch. He watched her face move through it, the arrest that charges the Amarillo case, and he watched her take each piece and hold it and set it down and take the next one. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The man in Amarillo," she said finally. "Do you think she stopped, started again. "Do you think she did the same thing to my daddy that she did to him?" "I think the DA believes so," Jack said. "And I think they're going to find out." Lily set the brush on the stall railing very carefully. She pressed both palms flat against the wood and looked at them. "He was healthy," she said quietly. "Before she came, he was really healthy. And then he got sick, and it happened fast, and she cried at the funeral, and everyone thought she was so sad." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't cry. People thought I was in shock. I wasn't in shock. I couldn't cry in front of her." She paused. "I knew something was wrong. I was 7 and I knew." "You were right," Jack said. The same thing he'd said in the truck on the way home from the courthouse. It was still the only thing that was equal to it. "She doesn't get to—" Lily's voice tightened, and then deliberately loosened the way she'd been learning to do lately, letting something through instead of pressing it all back down. He deserved better than what she gave him. He deserved somebody who actually loved him. He had somebody who actually loved him, Jack said. He had you. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright, not spilling, held by the same precise control she'd been holding everything with since the day he found her. But her chin moved once, and he saw the effort it took to keep steady. And he thought again what he'd thought a dozen times since that first afternoon, that the strength in this child was not something she'd been given. It was something she'd built alone out of necessity from materials no 9-year-old should ever have had to work with. He knew, she said. He wrote it down. He knew I loved him. He did, Jack said. And he knew who you were. He said so in those letters. She nodded once, picked up the brush, started working on Ranger's flank again, long steady strokes, and Jack let her work, because sometimes that's what you do when something big has been said. You find the nearest physical thing, and you do it, and you let the big thing settle into you at whatever pace it needs to. Ranger turned his head and looked at Lily with the large, patient eye that horses use when they've decided they don't mind a person anymore. Lily noticed and put her free hand on his nose. He didn't pull back. He likes me, she said. He stopped on that trail for you, Jack said. I'd say he more than likes you. Something moved through her face. Not quite a smile, more than a smile. The particular expression of someone who has been told something that connects one moment they thought they understood to another they didn't, and suddenly both of them are different. Good, she said, and kept brushing. The formal adoption petition was filed 6 weeks later. Mitchell had laid out the timeline carefully. Guardianship first, then the petition, then a waiting period required by Texas family law, then the hearing. It was going to take time. These things always took time. But the filing itself was a declaration, and declarations Jack had learned mattered to Lily in a way that was specific and important. She needed to see the thing written down. She'd grown up understanding that words on paper could be used against a person, and she was learning slowly that they could also be used for one. The night Mitchell submitted the paperwork, Jack told her at dinner. It's filed, he said. Official. It's in the system. Lily put her fork down, looked at him. That means it's real. It's been real, Rosa said from the stove without turning around. The paper just catches up to what already is. Lily considered this. Then she picked her fork back up and ate 3 more bites and said, How long until the hearing? Mitchell says 4 to 6 months best case. And then She stopped. The word sat there for a second. Then you're a Callahan, Jack said, if that's still what you want. She looked at him with the straight, direct gaze she'd developed, or maybe always had, maybe had just learned it was safe to use here. It's what I want, she said. It's been what I want for a while. Rosa made a sound in the kitchen that was absolutely not crying and that nobody commented on. The months that followed moved in the way that months do, when a life is remaking itself not in dramatic declarations, but in the small accumulations of ordinary days. Lily learned to ride. It took her 2 weeks to stop tensing when Ranger moved into a trot, and another week to relax into it, and the morning she finally let herself lean forward and just move with the horse instead of against him. She came back to the fence where Jack was watching, and her face was the most open he'd ever seen it. That's what it's supposed to feel like, he said. Why didn't you tell me? She demanded. It's completely different when you stop fighting it. I told you, he said. You had to find it yourself. She pointed at him. That is the most annoying kind of right. He laughed. It surprised him, the full, unguarded kind, that he hadn't done in longer than he could account for. Lily looked startled for a second, like she wasn't used to it. Then she grinned, and it was a real grin, wide and uncomplicated, and she turned Ranger back toward the open pasture and pushed him into a full run. Jack stood at the fence and watched her go, and something in his chest was so full it was almost uncomfortable, and he thought this must be what Thomas Harper had felt, watching her this particular impossible weight of loving someone who doesn't know yet how much of the future is going to be theirs. She came back from that ride with dust in her hair and color in her face, and talking at speed about how Ranger had taken the turn by the oak trees different than he usually did. and she thought maybe he did it on purpose to test her, and she talked all the way back to the barn, and all the way through, cooling him down, and Jack listened to every word of it, and Rosa, who had come out to call them in for lunch, stood in the yard and watched the two of them with an expression like someone witnessing the confirmation of something they had believed in all along. The twist when it came from a direction nobody had been looking. It was a Tuesday in November, 4 months after the filing, when Mitchell called with a different kind of news. Jack took it in the office, and this time, Lily was in the kitchen with Rosa, and he didn't call her in right away, because he needed to understand it himself first. Thomas Harper's will, Mitchell said. The original. Not the amendment that never got filed, the original document that Diane used to establish custody. A pause. Jack. There's a clause in it that nobody looked at closely enough because Diane's lawyer buried it in language. But it's there, and it's clear, and it changes things significantly. Tell me. Thomas Harper named a guardian. Not Diane, she was named as temporary custodian pending the activation of a specific clause. The actual named permanent guardian is his brother. Mitchell paused. A man named Daniel Harper, who lives in Wyoming. Jack was very still. Lily has an uncle. Lily has an uncle who has been trying to find her for 14 months. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. Diane buried the clause, Mitchell said. Buried the contact information, intercepted correspondence, told Daniel Harper that Lily didn't want contact with him. He hired his own lawyer 8 months ago and has been trying to establish contact through legal channels ever since. He hit a wall every time because Diane controlled all access. Mitchell's voice was careful now. He knows about the case. He's been following it. He submitted a motion to the court last week asking to be considered in the placement hearing. Jack sat back in his chair slowly. He thought about Lily's face when she smiled. He thought about how long it had taken her to stop asking implicitly whether the people around her were going to stay. He thought about 4 months of ordinary days accumulating into something that had started to look like a life. "What does this mean for the adoption?" he asked. The question cost him something to ask, and he asked it anyway, because the answer mattered more than the cost. "It complicates it," Mitchell said honestly. "A named family guardian has legal standing the court is obligated to consider. It doesn't automatically override your petition, but it means there's a competing claim, and the court is going to weight blood family heavily." A pause. "I need to be straight with you, Jack. If Daniel Harper is a fit guardian, and he wants custody, the court may favor that placement." Jack sat with that for a long moment. "What do you know about him?" he asked. "Clean record, stable income. He runs a small horse operation in Wyoming, no criminal history. He has 3 kids of his own, all minors, healthy household by every measure." Mitchell paused. "He sounds like a decent man. Does Lily know she has an uncle?" "That's the question," Mitchell said quietly. "We don't know what Thomas told her. We don't know what Diane told her. We need to ask." He went to the kitchen. Lily and Rosa were making something with pie dough. Lily's hands white with flour, Rosa directing with the confident authority of a woman who considered pie a serious undertaking. He stood in the doorway and said, "Lily, I need to talk to you. It's important." She looked at his face and read it the way she always did, and she set down the rolling pin and wiped her hands on the dishcloth without asking a single question. They sat at the kitchen table. Rosa stayed because Lily reached out and put her floured hand on Rosa's wrist when Rosa started to move away, and Rosa stayed. Jack told her, all of it plain and straight. Lily listened with the focused stillness she brought to everything that mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Uncle Danny," she said. Jack looked at her. "My daddy talked about him," she said slowly. "He said Danny was the best man he knew besides himself, and he said that was saying a lot because he thought pretty well of himself." The corner of her mouth moved. "He said if anything ever happened, Danny would—" She stopped. Her expression shifted. "He said Danny would come. He said Danny will come, Lilybug, no matter what he'll come. And I thought—" She stopped again. "Diane told me he didn't want contact. She said he'd tried to reach out once and decided it was too complicated. Her jaw tightened. She lied. She lied, Jack confirmed. Lily put both hands flat on the table. He's been trying to find me this whole time. For 14 months. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Her eyes went bright the way they'd gone bright in the barn, held not spilled, but barely. He really has been trying, she said. Daddy was right. He said he'd come. He came, Jack said. Rosa put her hand over Lily's on the table. Lily turned her palm up and held on. There was a pause, and Jack let it sit because this moment belonged to Lily entirely, and nothing he said was going to improve it. Then she looked up at him, and he saw the thing in her face. He hadn't been sure how to prepare for the complicated, honest thing. What does this mean for... She stopped, looked at his face with all her skill at reading what people were feeling underneath what they were saying. You're worried about what I'm going to want, she said quietly. I'm not worried, he said. I want you to have what's right for you. That's the whole thing, Lily. That's all it's ever been. But you want... She stopped, tried again. You want to keep the petition. What I want doesn't run this, he said. You're not a thing that gets decided between other people. You're the one who decides. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I want to meet him. Of course. And then I want to make the decision. She said it with the firmness she'd learned was safe to use here, the firmness that was really just the adult she'd always been, finally learning she had permission to take up that space. Not the court, not the lawyers, me. Yes, Jack said. That's exactly right. Daniel Harper drove down from Wyoming 10 days later. He was a lean, weathered man in his mid-40s with Thomas Harper's eyes, the same dark green that Lily had, and he pulled into the Callahan Flats driveway and got out of his truck and stood there for a moment before Lily came out the front door, and when she saw him, she stopped on the porch and they looked at each other from 20 feet apart, and the resemblance was so plain and so immediate that Rosa, standing in the kitchen window, pressed her hand flat against her mouth. You've got your daddy's chin, Daniel Harper said. His voice cracked on the last word. Lily came down the porch steps. You've got his eyes, she said. I have his eyes too. You do, he exhaled. God, you do. She walked up to him, and he held out his arms, and she walked into them, and he held her the way you hold something you've been searching for and were afraid you'd never find. And she held back, and the two of them stood in the drive of Callahan Flats while Jack watched from the porch and felt the full complicated weight of loving someone enough to want for them even the things that cost you. It cost him. He was honest enough with himself to know that. It cost him in a place he hadn't used before Lily Harper and had no intention of closing back up. But she was in her uncle's arms, and her uncle had her father's eyes, and Thomas Harper had said, Danny will come Lilybug, no matter what. And he had. Big. The decision came 3 days after Daniel Harper's visit. Lily asked for both of them, Jack and Daniel, to sit at the kitchen table together, and she sat at the head of it, which nobody had planned, but which felt entirely right once it happened. I've thought about it, she said. I've thought about it a lot. She looked at Daniel. You're my family. You're my daddy's brother, and you have his eyes, and talking to you is like... She stopped. It's like hearing an echo of something I thought I lost. And I want you in my life. I want to know your kids. I want to come to Wyoming, and I want you to come here, and I want us to be family for real. She paused. But I don't want to leave. Daniel Harper looked at her steadily. This is home, Lily said. And she said it without apology, without the careful hedging she used to put around everything that mattered, plain and direct the way she'd learned to be here. Jack stopped on the trail. Rosa kept the light on. This is where I learned that a place could feel safe. She looked at Jack. I want the adoption. I want to be Lily Callahan. She looked back at Daniel. And I want Uncle Danny at the hearing. Daniel Harper was quiet for a moment. Then he said in a voice that was rough at the edges and completely steady at the center, Your daddy would be... He stopped. "Thomas would be so proud of you." "I know," she said, simply and without false modesty, because Thomas Harper had told her exactly who she was, and she'd finally found her way back to believing him. "I know he would. Daniel reached across the table and put his hand over hers. Then he looked at Jack with the level-assessing look of a man who has just entrusted someone with the most important thing left of his brother. "You take care of her," he said. "I will," Jack said. "I already am." The adoption hearing was held on a bright Thursday morning in February, 8 months after Ranger stopped on a burning July trail for reasons that no one could fully explain, and everyone who knew that horse accepted without question. The courtroom was the same room, the same judge, but nothing else was the same. Mitchell Hale sat at one table. Daniel Harper sat in the gallery with Rosa. Lily sat beside Jack in a blue dress that Rosa had helped her pick out with her hair brushed and her hands folded and her chin at exactly the angle it always was when she had decided something. Judge Marsh read through the petition, asked the required questions, looked at Lily directly. "You understand what this means, that Jack Callahan becomes your legal parent with all rights and responsibilities that entails—" "Yes, ma'am," Lily said. "And this is what you want?" "Yes, ma'am." She paused, then added with the particular precision she used when she wanted to be absolutely clear, "It's been what I wanted for a long time. I was just waiting for the paper to catch up." Something moved in Judge Marsh's face, a warmth she didn't bother to conceal. "I've been doing this for 22 years, she said. "That is the most sensible answer I have ever heard in this courtroom." She picked up her pen. "Mr. Callahan, do you accept the full legal responsibility of parenthood for Lily Ann Harper with all the permanence and obligation that entails?" Jack looked at Lily. She looked back at him with those dark green eyes, her father's eyes, Daniel Harper's eyes, and in them was everything the last 8 months had put there: the trail and the fear and the courtroom and the letters and the slow, careful, irreversible process of learning to trust. "I do," he said. The pen moved. The paper was signed. The gavel came down. And Lily Ann Harper became Lily Ann Callahan in a courthouse in West Texas on a bright Thursday morning with her uncle in the gallery, and Rosa crying without apology, and a judge who had seen everything smiling in a way she usually reserved for after hours. Lily sat very still for 1 second after the gavel fell. Then she turned to Jack and said quietly, so only he could hear, "Hi, Dad." 2 words. 6 letters. The weight of everything that had happened between a July dirt road and this room compressed into the simplest possible form. Jack Callahan, who had built 14,000 acres of West Texas on hard ground and harder work, and the conviction that some things were worth fighting for, no matter what they cost, put his arm around his daughter and pulled her close, and she tucked herself against his side like she'd been doing it her whole life, like she was finally doing the thing she'd always been supposed to do, like she'd come home to a place that had been waiting for her before either of them knew it. "Hi, Lilybug," he said. Outside Texas kept on being Texas, wide and blazing and indifferent to everything smaller than itself. But inside that courtroom, something had been finished, and something had been begun, and the two things were the same thing, and they were enough. Some trails end where they were always meant to end, and some children find their way home by roads so hard and so unlikely that it takes your breath away, not because it was easy, but because it happened at all. It happened, it was real, and it would not be undone.